Good evening and welcome. I'm Greg Kesich, the editorial page editor at the Portland Press Herald and Maine Sunday Telegram. And I want to welcome subscribers from the Press Herald, the Sun Journal, the Morning Sentinel, and the Kennebec Journal. We are extremely grateful for your support of our work, and we are so happy that you wanted to join us tonight. We'll be taking audience questions later in the program, so if you have a question, make sure you submit it through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. This discussion is also being recorded and will be available online later on at pressherald.com. We had a really interesting debate. We have a lot to say about it, and we have an interesting panel. You know them as our regular Sunday Telegram columnists, and I think I will let them introduce themselves, starting with the bearded gentleman from Buxton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Nemitz. I'm a news columnist for the Press Herald and Maine Sunday Telegram and a member of the Press Herald editorial board. Good to be aboard.
The disembodied voice of Jim Fossil, I think.
Yes, everybody. Sorry for not having video coming to you from Gardner.
Yeah.
Good to see everybody tonight, and good to be here and talk about the debate.
Great. And Jim's been a columnist with us for 3 years. And Victoria?
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Hugo Vidal. You probably know me as the Maine Millennial. I am the second most famous newspaper columnist from Buxton. And between the two of us, we're hogging all the town's internet.
Right. I know. I'm surprised the whole system doesn't come crashing down with two people online.
If the wind starts blowing.
Yeah. So this was quite a debate. Let's start with you, Bill. I mean, what's your takeaway? Did we learn anything tonight?
Well, I think we did. I mean, I went into this fully expecting that Susan Collins would, move easily into this. She's done this so many times, and I thought she'd hold her own, and she certainly did that. There's no question. She didn't make any major mistakes. On the other hand, I went into this really a little curious about Sarah Gideon. It was her first time really on the live statewide stage, and I think a lot of people were curious how she was going to do in this situation. I came away very impressed with her. I thought she did very well, not only in her own movement from issue to issue throughout the debate, but also in pushing this central question, which is really overhangs this whole race, and that involves President Trump, and more specifically Senator Collins' refusal to date to do what she did 4 years ago and tell us how she feels about President Trump going into this election. My only real reaction to that is that Sarah Gideon, I think, actually could have pushed a little harder on that. She brought it up, I think, 2 or 3 times. And as for the others, I thought Lisa Savage did very well. I think she was very articulate, very poised, and Max Lynn, well, every show needs a circus, so. I think the best line of the debate was "request denied."
Right.
That one caught me off guard.
Mm-hmm. What'd you see, Jim?
Request denied.
Right. Right. Feel free to put that question aside.
Yeah.
And what is your strategy? What's your strategy, Jim?
No, I thought it was interesting at the end when Gideon didn't have a clear answer on the Justice Roberts question, whether it was about Kavanaugh in specific or about generally the abortion issue, whether she would ever vote to confirm a pro-life nominee who was qualified, who she thought was fit for office. Mm-hmm. That was the bigger issue there. And she wasn't really prepared for that at all, which was surprising to me. I thought that would have been a question they would have prepped for very readily.
Mm-hmm. Any other general sense? How did you think Senator Collins did?
Yeah, I thought she did very well. She's obviously as Bill said, very experienced, and she's a good debater, and she knows the policies and she knows what's going on at a state and federal level. I was surprised how little mention there was generally of foreign policy at all, which is fascinating to me.
Was there any?
Not that I heard. No,
yeah.
Unless I missed one.
I
thought Max Lynn might have brought it up, but he didn't.
He brought up a lot of things.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to
It
keep
could have
track.
been in there.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your take, Victoria? What did you see? What did you learn?
Well, I'm pretty sure that when Collins did the jab about Gideon not paying her interns, she was referencing my column from a few weeks ago about it, because I don't think there's been anything else in the paper about it. So when that happened, I screamed and I texted my whole family. It was very exciting for us. But on a regular level, yeah, Max Lynn just came across as absolutely wacky, which is, did make it more fun to watch, because watching politicians give like very evasive half answers is never very entertaining. But also I don't think he's particularly qualified at all to be a senator.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, before you go on, Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I came in with very high expectations for Senator Collins because of her experience, and I actually spent some time this weekend watching some of the old debates from 2008 with Tom Allen, and she. I thought did as expected. I think she seemed a little on the defensive on a number of answers. I think Sarah Gideon challenged her more than her opponents have in the past. At one point I stopped counting, but it seemed like 4 out of the first 5 Gideon answers she pivoted to a comparison with Collins. So Gideon seemed to come in prepared to attack, and Collins, she did what you would expect her to do. She's got like this great mastery of the facts and figures, and she is able to talk about bills that she co-sponsored, and is able to kind of hold her own. But I thought Gideon was also very had a very mastery of the facts as she was presenting them, and I thought made a more pointed argument than Collins did. I thought again, as Bill said, I thought Lisa Savage had some really really good moments. Especially early on, it was where she had the disadvantage of coming after Lynn, and every time she answered a question, I couldn't remember what the question was anymore. But she did, and she was able to pivot to her issues, to Green New Deal, Medicare for all. I thought she stayed very cool and was able to get her the message that she wanted to give out.
I thought she was very much on message, and that's very important in her position.
And it's hard to do, right?
Medicare for all and Social Security tossed in as well are really central messages, and I thought she showed a lot of discipline. The other two, Collins and Gideon, were, as you said, they were much more kind of reactive to what the other was doing and making sure that they got in their requisite number of jabs at the other.
Bigs.
I want to make one point we got to Jim, because Jim mentioned earlier the Roberts thing, and that really caught my attention too. Right at the end, it was, I think, as far as the debate goes, that was the last exchange. And I found myself wondering, and I actually got a text from a friend who put it very well. The best answer to the question on Roberts, rather than kind of fumbling and not being prepared for it, for Gideon would have been to say, you tell us who you're going to vote for president, and I'll tell you years ago. But unfortunately, you get caught up there with a question you didn't see coming, and it didn't go well for her. But I think compared to the bulk of the debate, I don't think it was.
And also, Greg, I would point out that compared to past debates, which you were watching earlier in the week, I think Senator Collins was actually unusually aggressive here quite a bit, like going after Gideon on donations and on the defund the police and on Roberts.
But she's always done that. I mean, she's always been very good on offense and defense. If you look at her debates with Tom Allen, she really always, every answer had a dig about, how little he accomplished in the House, and his argument was, I was in the minority, I can't, it's a different animal, but it didn't, it just came across as, anyway, she has a history of being able to get her digs in my view. one of the interesting things about this is you find a lot about you figure out where the candidates, how they see where the race is. And it might be good to just go around and Bill, like going into this debate tonight, where did how would you size up the race? And did you see anything tonight that changes your view?
Yeah, well, the first question going into this race, the only number we've been going on for so long now has been this average poll lead by Gideon of 4.5% over Collins. I think that's I thought all along, frankly, that that's inflated. I think this is going to be a much tighter race going down to election day. My guess, I would be surprised if it was decided by anything more than 1%, maybe 2%, but I think it's going to be that close, and I think everybody knows it. I think that as far as tonight goes, I don't think there were any knockouts or TKOs. I think they each, they got a couple of rhetorical blows in here and there, but we'll have to see if there's any polling. I think that, as I said in the opening, I think what you are going to see is kind of a collective sigh of relief for those who may have been unsure about Sarah Gideon. I think they can look at her now and say, yes, she is, she's in the right league. She has what it takes to go toe-to-toe with Collins, and she really had what I was looking for, and I guess the best word is kind of a gravitas. She brought some seriousness and poise and command of the issues. She was articulate. So if anybody gets in it, I don't think Collins necessarily gained anything. I don't think she necessarily lost anything. I do think Gideon might have solidified some of her support.
Yeah. How about you, Jim? What's your take? Where did you see the race coming in?
Yeah, I actually pretty much agree with Bill on that. I think it's going to be a lot closer than the polls show.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of those polls have been various firms at various different times that use different methodologies. So it's hard to compare them and contrast them. Probably the Bangor Daily News one was the best one, and that showed quite a gap, which is interesting, between registered voters and likely voters in the responses. And that, to me, says that it's going to be closer than most of the polls say as well. And I agree. I don't think that there were any huge difference makers on either side, really. Both candidates did well. I thought the Roberts question was odd that she wasn't ready for that kind of question. But besides that, she didn't stumble so badly that it's going to be used instantly to overwhelm her in a terrible ad or anything. So, as far as bad answers go, it wasn't a bad answer.
Yeah. Victoria.
I think Max Lynn managed to knock himself out.
Right. It's officially a three-way race.
He declines that.
Right.
Yeah, that was interesting. I think Susan Collins is not great on stage. She doesn't have a lot of charisma. She doesn't pop out at you, and she's old. And I say this, I know I'm the youngest person here, but she does look kind of old.
Like a true millennial.
Right.
Someone's got to be the voice of the youth. She does. She looks old. I was just doing the numbers. She's been in the Senate since I was 5, and I turn 28 tomorrow. So I think a lot of longtime Mainers are going to be looking at, well, Susan Collins has been in the Senate for this long. What's she done? Because things have kind of only gotten worse since 1995 in general, except for the rich.
Victoria,
you go.
Well, just the longevity issue. After it's been 24 years now, and I think that history has taught us that the longer you hold that kind of a tenure, 4 terms now, in some ways, the harder it gets, particularly when you go into a time of change, a time of crisis, a time of upheaval.
Yeah.
That tends to be the time when one's longevity in a body like the Senate starts to become perhaps more of a liability than an asset. And Margaret Chase Smith is a great example in the mid-70s when she was kind of summarily ousted by Bill Hathaway. And I feel in some ways, going back to what Victoria said, that the climate is right now for a change. And if this is a change election, I think Susan Collins needs to be worried about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure she's worried. So go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say that I think that that comparison is used a lot, but I think it's not really necessarily accurate for a number of reasons. One, totally different times. I mean, that was before I was alive, that race.
So they're right there.
Right, exactly. And
it's a whole different world.
And number two, Margaret Chase Smith was caught completely unawares because she was down in D.C. and she wasn't aware that there was a serious campaign being waged against her at home. Susan Collins is never caught unawares of anything politically.
Right.
I would just say to that, Jim, that it was a different time in some ways, but going to the point of, a change election, it was very similar to right now. We're coming right off Watergate. There was a real strong throw the bums out mentality. It was directed at all incumbents. And the same kind of unrest that existed among the electorate back then certainly exists right now.
Yeah, and certainly the point that the best time to knock out an incumbent, I've always said this in the legislature as well, is either the first time they run for re-election or the last time. Because they are either unawares or getting lazy. But that's not the case for Senator Collins. She's never either one of those. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess my expectations going in is that, like the rest of you, I felt like the polls were not really, telling the whole story. I always see this as Collins's race to lose. If you look at the history, there hasn't been an incumbent who lost statewide in Maine since Margaret Chase Smith, I believe, in whatever that was, 74. And like Jim says, Collins is famously on the ball in terms of politics. What's clear is, we've all written this. I think this is going to be a very different election for her than she's ever faced before. She's last time out against Shannon Bellows, I think she had close to 40% of people who identified as Democrats, and that is no longer the case. I don't think she is going to be able to, really draw a lot of Democrats in this much more polarized environment to win. Unless the polls are really, really off, and maybe they are, but if Donald Trump does about as well as he did last time, she would lose if she only had Trump voters. So she needs Biden voters to win. And I know there are some who are sticking with her, but I think it's going to be greatly diminished from what she's had in the past. And again, like not to keep going back to 2008, but I think it was like a more relevant race because it was a presidential year, and it was against a well-financed opponent. She got, so I think it was like 2-1. She was like 60-40 that year, and Obama won the state handily, like with something like 58%. And so she way outperformed the Republican. About a third of her votes came from people who voted for Obama. And I did a little bit of math, and somebody should check me on this. But if everybody who voted for Obama voted for her, she still would have won, but not by much. It would have been like a 1 or 2 point victory. And I think that's probably where this race is. Very, very close. I think 6 years ago, Paula Page got 47% of the vote in a three-way race, and you got to figure Susan Collins thinks she can do better, 3 points better than Paula Page. So, I think that's probably how they see the race, and that's how close what we're looking at is, in my view.
Well, and that's hardly a reach for her, doing it 3 points better than Paula Page.
Yeah, you would think. Anybody who voted for Paula Page in 2014, you'd think would be still with her.
And if they're not, they're probably maybe ranking Max Lynn first and voting for her second.
Right. Well, that's my next question. The independents. We've all talked about Max Lynn. He definitely, got a lot of attention. Did he distract from the debate? Does it make it harder for somebody who's in a challenger position like Gideon to have somebody like that, kind of upsetting the apple cart? Since it's a ranked choice vote election, do we think that, say, Lisa Savage or Max Lynn, people are going to give them more of a chance than they would have if it was just an all first past the post race? What's your sense about the independents, Bill?
I think that, yeah, I'm glad we got to the ranked choice issue because I think it's going to be a big one in this election. Based on her performance tonight, I think a lot of people who are solidly behind Lisa Savage are going to feel much better, about where they are. So I certainly don't think Lisa Savage is going to lose any support tonight. Frankly, I think she might pick some up. But I also think that those people are, number one, they're much more likely to be ranked choice voting supporters, meaning they will go through the exercise when they fill out their ballot. And I think those people will also, almost to a person, choose Sarah Gideon as their second candidate. So in a second round of voting, that would throw, even if it throws, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000, I don't know how many votes it would be, but if it throws that many votes into Sarah Gideon's column in a tight race in the second round, it could prove very significant. If you look at Lynn, on the other hand, I'm a great believer in if you're a candidate, you should get to debate. So I don't deny him his place on the stage. I think, as Victoria notes, he did provide some entertainment value. But when it comes down to the electoral issue and his voters, contrasting with Savage's voters, I think these people are going to be pretty hardcore Republican, leaning far right to the Trump supporters. And they're not big fans of RCV. So I think that when they are faced with a ranked choice ballot, their own little protest or rebellion is going to be, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to fill in Max Lynn's name. And if they do that, and it comes to a second round, of course, those will be that number of votes that don't get passed on then to Collins. So in the ranked choice battle, I think ultimately Gideon stands to gain here.
I would counter that. If you look at the past 2 Republican primaries that have used ranked choice voting, and we only have 2 so far, so it's tough to really provide much statistical context. But if you look at the 20 second district race and the 2018 congressional primary, the vast majority of Republican voters actually did use second choice, even though they did use ranked choice voting, even though they theoretically opposed it and the party was against it. So I don't think most Republican voters care about using it or not, just like they don't care if candidates use clean elections or not. I think that's an issue for activists and for the party more than it is for the average voter.
Was that true in the second district race in 18?
Yeah. It was decided by ranked choice voting.
But they never actually counted Poliquin's, the Poliquin voters second. So I can't remember. But anyway, go ahead. So what do you think of the? Do they still have an impact on the race? Do you see the Jim? Do you see the independents affecting it either way?
Unless it gets nail-bitingly close, I don't think either independent's going to have much of a factor. There's nobody like, for example, Elliot Cutler or Terry Hayes there is going to appeal to mainstream voters, or people who can appeal to the fringes on either side, and that's going to be a very small percentage in this race, and especially with 2 prominent major party candidates running.
Yeah.
The only thing they're going to do is prevent, possibly, maybe in all likelihood, prevent a clear majority winner in the first round.
Yeah. If it is close.
As Jim says, if it's a nail biter, if it isn't really that close going into the second round, then every vote really counts. And but we'll see it's going to be up to those 2 candidates to see whether we actually employ ranked choice voting in this election.
But then again, also,
I think Lisa will take more out of Gideon's than Max Lynn will out of Collins, especially after tonight's performance.
I would also point out that generally with RCV, besides the second congressional district general election, it hasn't actually changed from the first round to the final outcome. Generally, the person who has led in the first round has won in the end. That happened with Anna Mills. It happened with the congressional primaries both in 2018 and 2020. It happened with the gubernatorial primary. Generally, it doesn't actually change the result.
It's true of all 3 mayoral elections in Portland too.
Exactly. Yep.
Including the one where there were 17 candidates and none of them even changed position.
Yeah, it didn't matter at all. Yeah.
It didn't. The only time it comes into play is in a very close election, like the second district race. If you have a very close race with multiple candidates, more than two candidates, then it comes into play.
And you can argue that even in that case, it probably wouldn't have mattered because if it hadn't been in place, those candidates might not have even run.
Right. Or people may not have wanted to vote. People might have done the strategic voting, whatever, mental gymnastics.
Exactly.
No one likes that.
It's hard not to do it, right? We all do it.
Still doing it, even though we have ranked choice.
Yeah.
I also hate the stupid, oh, you're wasting your vote argument, which is just insanity. Vote for whoever you want. But,
right. But it's, it's, I think that, what's one thing interesting is that in a ranked choice election, you're supposed to, be nicer to each other. Certainly, Max Lynn didn't get the memo on that.
Yeah, I love the line. I've got a lot of bombshells I got to drop tonight.
Exactly right. This is my strategy.
Let me tell you that one thing about all these electoral reforms and clean elections things, there is nothing you can do to make people be nicer to each other in politics.
Right.
Politics is nasty.
Well, it turns out you don't have to be nice to the whoever you're closest to. You have to be nice to the people who are further down the list. So.
And people don't necessarily want that. I made this point in a column months ago that people don't want every election in this country to turn into a Supreme Court hearing where nobody wants to offend anybody.
Right. But, I would say that, Lisa Savage made a very good case, strong case for some core progressive issues. And I think people will be able to listen to those arguments in a way that they wouldn't have if they thought it was a close race with a first past the post result. So I think that in her case, ranked choice voting will change things. Now, we've seen independent Green type candidates. She used to be a Green, I guess, get close to 10% of the vote.
Jonathan Carter days.
Jonathan Carter did. Pat LaMarche also, and it's. I guess we'll see. It'll be a test. Does she get more than 9% of the vote?
I don't feel like she really has quite the stature of Pat LaMarche or Jonathan Carter because she's not as well established amongst the wider electorate. But Bill can probably speak to that a little bit more than I can.
Well, I agree. I think that as articulate as she is, and frankly, as well as she presents herself as a candidate, I think her biggest problem is a lack of a really deep-rooted campaign organization. And that's one of the things that those early green independents had going for them was that, it was a movement. And with the movement, you have, you got feet on the ground, you got people willing to knock on doors, you got all those things. And it would, as an interesting historical exercise, it would have been interesting to transport Lisa Savage right now back into those days when that apparatus existed, and to see, how serious a candidate she would have been. But right now, I think her biggest obstacle is, like I said, boots on the ground.
Well, and a lot of that apparatus grew out of the Maine Yankee referendums, and not having the CMP quarter on the ballot probably really, really hurts her.
Yeah, well, Max wants to change that, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's not going to be a problem anymore. Max Lynn's got it covered.
It probably hurts Max. It probably hurts Max too. Max would have had the conservative anti-CMP people, and she would have had the liberal ones.
Yeah, right.
What about the president? Because I think that how people feel about Trump really is the core issue in this election. And he sucks up all the news. He's constantly, getting attention. I think we had this experience with when Paul LePage was running for re-election. The way it was very difficult for the other candidates to make news. And I think this election season, it's going to be really difficult for candidates for even running for U.S. Senate to make news. Bill, you brought it up about how Gideon brought up, the Collins' unwillingness to say how she feels about Trump or whether she's going to support Trump or not. But how do you think an election during Trump is different than what we've seen in the past?
Well, I think it's very simple. You look at these times, we look at all the things that we're facing, the pandemic, racial unrest, civil rights, Black Lives Matter, the economy, and you can go on and on. But the thing about all these issues is that in this election, all roads lead to Donald Trump. And so ultimately, you can say one issue, the pandemic, is more important than the economy or vice versa. But in the end, it all points back to the White House and Trump's handling of these various issues. So I think if ever there was an election that truly is a referendum on the president, this is it. And I think that goes to the core of Sarah Gideon's criticism and many other people's criticism of Susan Collins is, Collins tried to dodge the first reference to Trump by saying, well, Maine voters don't need me to advise them how to vote for president. And, it was, I don't even think it was an artful dodge, but it was a good try. And Gideon came back shortly later and made a very good point. He says that's not what they want. They're not looking for advice on whom to vote for president. What they're looking for is a clear statement from their incumbent senator as to where she stands on really what is the central issue in this election, and that is Donald Trump. And so for Susan Collins to continually say, I don't want to get into the presidential race, I don't want to do that, she's failing to recognize that that is central on most people's minds right now. And if she goes into this election without ever giving any definitive judgment on Trump, other than that he's gone from uneven to very uneven to extremely uneven in his handling of the pandemic, according to Collins. She's going to have to do better than that. How about Senator Angus King, who, when asked about the pandemic, says that Donald Trump is it's an abject dereliction of duty. That's the kind of language I think that some people want to hear and some don't, but at least it's going to clarify where you stand. And Collins has fallen far short of that.
What do you think, Jim?
Well, it's interesting that Greg, you brought up the 2008 election, that reelect, when Bush was on the ballot. And I remember doing calls for President Bush in May.
No, McCain was on the ballot.
Oh, no, I was thinking 2004. Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, 2004. Yeah.
But I remember doing calls for President Bush in 2004, helping with that a little bit and seeing how well and truly hated he was in Maine at the time, despite having, a lot of deep ties to the state. And then in 2008, a lot of that just transferred to McCain because he was a Republican nominee, not because people disliked John McCain per se. And yet, Susan not only endorsed McCain, she enthusiastically campaigned for him and didn't earn her bit, even though McCain got swamped in Maine. So it's interesting to see. I don't know if that's as much about Donald Trump as it is about just times changing and becoming more polarized.
Well, so I've always been told that the sort of rank and file, Republicans, registered Republicans, the activist class are to the right of the Republicans who win statewide. Obviously, Paula Page would be the exception to that rule, but Collins and Olympia Snowe and Bill Cohen seem to be, pretty good examples of it. Is there something going on there where, she definitely needs some Biden voters, but she really needs every single Trump voter, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, both candidates need their entire base. And one of the problems that Gideon has is that even though she's certainly capable and she's got history and experience of being speaker, she doesn't have any history and experience of running a statewide campaign herself. No. So she doesn't have any natural base, and she has no real identity with a certain geographic area. So she doesn't have any base far from being a Democrat. Mm-hmm. So if that works for her, it'll be the first time it's ever worked for anybody in Maine statewide, as I wrote last week, sort of. Usually just being a Democrat isn't enough. Usually Mainers want more than that. And they don't want just Republican either. They want their own kind of Republican, their own kind of Democrat. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues now, or if, as I said, we're just getting so polarized that doesn't matter anymore.
Speaking of bases, I think Susan Collins, I've always thought her base really, you could say arguably, has been in the middle in the past. I mean, she obviously gets the Republican vote, but what has put her over the top time and time again is that wide swath of independent voters in Maine. And as you pointed out earlier, Greg, more than a few Democrats at times. And I think she's backed into a corner right now, because if she says anything derogatory about Trump, as she did 4 years ago when she wasn't running, she runs the risk of losing all of that, pretty, what we would say, hardcore Republican base who are backing Trump right now. On the other hand, by not saying anything, she's frustrating a lot of people in the middle who are saying, her failure to stake out her position there is costing her votes. So it's kind of like she's kind of damned if she does and damned if she doesn't right now, because either way she loses some component of what we would call her broader base. But she's very reliant on that middle, and she always has been.
What do you think, Victoria?
Well, she's clearly trying to, play bat for both teams. She's just not doing a very successful job of it. I think Susan Collins would be a great senator for Maine if Maine was the only state. She doesn't do any crazy scandals. She's good at bringing, grant money and stuff like that to Maine. But when you look at the big picture, when you look at the heck hole our country is sinking into, you realize she's just not enough.
Well, do you think that everybody is thinking about Trump as much as I am? I mean, to me, he's like the only news story, and it's exhausting. He's been in my head for 5 years now. Is that?
I think with Trump, there's no room for sort of middle ground feelings. Like, I can look at Susan Collins and say, okay, I like this about her, I dislike this about her. I look at Sir Gideon and there are things to like and things to dislike. But with Trump, it's very hard to do that. People either like him or they don't. And so where Susan Collins has made a career of being kind of in the middle of the road there, it's just not going to work. And he is the leader of the Republican Party. I think part of Susan Collins's problem is the Republican Party is no longer what it was when, she was growing up and when she was first getting into politics. It has taken a hard swerve to the right, and as we can see. And she just refuses to abandon ship from any of that.
You too, right, Jim?
Well, it's interesting. I talked to some of my modern Republican friends who say that they wish that Susan Collins would stand up to Trump as much as, say, Mitt Romney does. But the fact of the matter is that if you actually look at their voting records, she votes against Trump more often than Mitt Romney does on all the actual issues. She just doesn't like to talk about it as much. And actually doing things and being effective and actually voting rather than being grandstander is sort of the summary of her career. And so it's not unusual that she would take this approach. That's how she's always served the state.
Show me the results.
I would agree with that in normal times, but right now, I think the biggest issue facing this country right now begins and ends with the word leadership and what many perceive to be a lack of leadership coming from the highest leadership position in our government, and that's the president. So I hear what you're saying, Jim, on specific votes, but being in politics is sometimes more than how you vote on this bill or that bill. It's how you present yourself as a bona fide leader in government and in society. And when things really go wrong, how tall you stand and how loudly you speak against whatever that wrong might be. And in this election, I think voting records are going to take a back seat to those kind of statements of conscience, not to invoke Margaret J. Smith again, but where people stand up and identify and distinguish themselves as leaders by standing up to what they perceive to be a major wrong in our society and saying, here's where I stand. Because it not only clarifies for people where they stand, but at the same time, it gives people something to hang on to or something to reject. It's what being a leader is all about.
In that case, then you're saying that pleasing the editorial boards of various papers is more important than how you actually vote on things.
Absolutely. that is well put.
Well,
think it's
No, no, it's Jim. Like it's like history doesn't remember the totality of a legislator's votes. They, people, if they're remembered for anything, it's for like one or two moments. And Susan Collins has had a ton of moments that are really she's really benefited from. For instance, voting against the Clinton impeachment. Um, her advocacy for "Don't Ask, Don't Tell."
Voting
I'm
against repealing Obamacare.
Yes, against repealing of Obamacare. Right.
Right.
So those, and obviously, maybe I'm biased because those are all moments where she went my way, but she went against, self-interest, going against the interest of her party, and lately, and maybe this is again the Trump thing, but everything is so heightened. It seems like we're having like big historic moments every day, and what happened 6 months ago. Like 6 months ago, Trump was being impeached, and now it's like we don't even remember it. The
she would like us to not remember it.
Well, the history
Stephen
is
King
just,
doesn't remember it.
I mean, the history is just flying by. It seems to me.
Look at, going back to that point, look at what happened. And this illustrates the point I made earlier when she voted on her Obamacare vote. Remember the airport scene in Bangor where
Yeah.
she got off the plane and the entire terminal erupted in applause? And I think, at least at that moment, and maybe when she looks back on her career, it will. I think at that moment it's probably the most gratifying moment of her career. I talked to her about it, and she was she was walking on air for days after that experience because it was just so. She was connecting so much with those people, and she felt so uplifted by the response she got coming home from Washington after that vote, and having this entire airport terminal burst into spontaneous applause for her. Those are the moments I'm talking about here, and that is what, since that vote, she's been preciously short of.
Victoria, say what you wanted to say, and then were you going to you looked like you were about to say something.
Yes, so it's not just those moments and those votes, it's the effect that they have. So I watched her Obamacare vote with McCain and Murkowski with my father while he was dying of cancer. He died 1 month after that vote. And because Obamacare hadn't been repealed, my mom and my sister were able to buy healthcare on the exchanges because we lost healthcare when he died. But now, here we are, about 3 years later, millions have lost healthcare because of the pandemic. You lose your job, boom, you're gone. You don't have any money to buy into the Obamacare exchanges because the economy's crashed. And Susan Collins has not done anything. She's not fixed anything. That one vote that she did was good, but she hasn't, you got to look around and say, well, what's the effect of that vote, Ben? What effect is she having now? How is she helping her constituents? And the answer is she's not. Like, it's good that we still have the part of Obamacare that we have left, but Republican position on healthcare is,
So I want to give Jim the last word on this because we need to go to questions from the audience, and we've been kind of ganging up on it. But anything you want to add to this?
Oh, I expected that. I'm actually pleased.
MD Harmon said, I could take 7 of them with the one arm tied behind my back. Yeah.
Well, and comparing me to Mike is quite an honor. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But
you have his level of flexibility.
I've been happy with all of her votes of late. And I was especially happy with what a great job she did crafting and implementing the Paycheck Protection Program. Of course, no government program is perfect, but it was certainly good enough for Sarah Gideon's husband to get a benefit from it. So
very good. And this newspaper.
Yes, exactly.
That's the first mention I've heard of Sarah Gideon's husband tonight.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, Strawberry, do we have questions?
We sure do. So we're going to start off with one for Victoria. Thomas Kircher is wondering, do you as a millennial have any faith that either political party has any intention of addressing the issues your generation are concerned about?
Not really. I think the Democrats at this point have more of a hope for it than Republicans because of we've been seeing a lot of groundswell support for candidates who want the big solutions that our country pretty clearly needs. But most corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans are only willing to nibble around the edges of our problems a little bit. I mean, we've just, my generation has seen politicians fail and fail, and our country, basically our government just doesn't function right now. Like, we've all kind of given up on the idea that the Senate will do anything with the House to help us, even though we're in a pandemic. We are literally trapped in our houses right now because of a deadly disease. And the government just kind of sidestepped away from that. The western half of the country is on fire because politicians from both parties have been ignoring climate change for decades. We can't even agree that healthcare should be a human right and affordable to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. So no, I don't think most of my generation, and certainly not of my sister's generation, who is Gen Z, we just never seen them able to do things. I have very little hope for the future.
Don't we all? Lawrence Blaisdell is asking, Collins is a heavyweight in Washington and brings so much to the state of Maine with demonstrated success. Do you believe Gideon can replace this?
Who wants to take that?
I think for starters, it depends on who controls the Senate after this election. You know, if you, as Greg said earlier, if you're in the minority and you're a freshman legislator, good luck. So I think it would be a long, hard climb. I think, on the other hand, you know, if the Democrats were able to swing the Senate in this election, I don't think Sarah Gideon would wake up and find herself on the Appropriations Committee. But over time, as it's been with Senator Collins, you know, you win a few more elections and you move up in those ranks. So, you know, I think that she would have to climb that same ladder that others have. As for Susan Collins being a heavyweight in the Senate right now, I think a lot of attention is paid to that. Frankly, I don't necessarily ascribe to it. I think that her vote is very valued, and I think that there is some deference shown to her when the Senate leadership, majority leadership, can afford to show deference. However, when the time comes to really crack down on a vote, I think a lot of times Susan Collins has found herself kind of with the rug pulled out from under her. And a lot of things that she has fought for, whether she gets them depends largely on what the nose count is in Washington. Right. If they can afford to lose her vote, they'll lose it. If they can't, forget about it.
Yeah, I think I would add, you know, whoever wins this race is likely to be in the majority. You know, this is one of the few pivotal races in the country. And if Susan Collins is in the majority, she will likely be, you know, she's said that she'll be chairperson of the Appropriations Committee. And that's, you know, certainly good for getting some programs back to Maine. But you'd also have to consider that means Mitch McConnell will also be the Senate Majority Leader, and there will be, you know, no votes on anything he doesn't approve of. He'll really control the agenda as he has for the last 6 years. So you have to weigh that. You know, is that good for Maine to maybe get, like, you know, a few more you know, construction projects and scholarship funds, but no climate strategy. You know, no energy policy, no healthcare policy. Which is, you know, what comes with a Republican Senate.
And I'd actually like to answer that as well. I think actually Senator Collins, even if somehow the Democrats managed to get a majority without defeating her, and Joe Biden got elected, she would maintain her influence either way. She knows Joe Biden from working with him for 20 years in the Senate. They've been friends, they've been co-workers for a long time, and he would be counting on her to work with him, just as Trump does on a lot of issues. So she would actually retain her influence. In some ways, she might even be more influential if the Democrats have the majority, which obviously I'm not hoping for as a Republican, but it could be good for her either way.
A question from Cindy Castleman. Will votes for Gideon be largely an attempt to help Democrats regain Senate as much, if not more than, as anti-Collins?
Yes.
I think it's all the same thing. You know, I think that there's a pivotal race. So you're voting, you know, your votes for Gideon include votes for people who want the Democrats to be in control.
Yeah, it's not really about anti-Collins. It's about anti-Trump and pro-Democrat.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's right.
I think that it's kind of a distinction in search of the difference there.
Yeah, I think if Trump weren't president, then probably Collins would be glad in a re-election as usual.
Yeah.
Question from Stuart Gilbert. The most critical task our senator will have over the next 2 years is to obtain federal funds to enable our state and local governments to recover from this recession caused by the pandemic. How would you compare how effective Collins or Gideon would be?
You want to take that, Jim?
Yeah, I think that's, again, a great example of where her seniority and her experience, regardless of whether she's in the majority or the minority or who the president is really going to be valuable to Maine. It's especially valuable to Maine when you consider that we've already, that how much we depend on federal funding for a number of major employers, especially BIW. The shipyard could really be at risk if things don't work out there and we don't have a senior senator who can actually represent us and fight for us in the Senate.
Republicans aren't giving state and local governments any more help now. Why should we expect that they'll do it if they continue to control the Senate? They don't, like the vast majority of the Republican Party just does not believe in spending large amounts of government money for anything, even if it's to help the smaller governments.
Yeah, I think that in addition to money to help the recession brought on by the pandemic, I first and foremost would like to see more money for the pandemic so that we can find our way out of this. But I think I might have a different answer if some bill were coming out of Congress right now with some reconciliation of the House and Senate bills. But right now, we are going nowhere. Right now.
I mean, the Republicans voted yesterday on a bill that did zero to help state and local governments.
Right, and
so I think,
I mean, there were several blank spots in that bill.
Yeah.
And McConnell acknowledged that I'm doing this for 7 senators.
And I think that Senator Collins has made it clear that she wants aid for state and local governments as well in any final bill, and so does most of the Senate, to be honest, in both parties. There are just there's a number of Republican senators who don't want to do anything, but they're probably not even the majority of the caucus, let alone the Senate.
And yet they're running the show because there's no money coming from the Senate.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Well, the Senate's not going to pass the House bill, and the House isn't going to pass the Senate bill, so they have to actually negotiate.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
How does that work? It's been so long.
It'd be nice if Senator Collins reminded them.
Yeah, it would, actually.
We have a couple questions for Victoria. Do you think younger people are inspired by this race to come out and vote in greater numbers than before? And also, what do you think the impact of the women's vote will be in regards to the Kavanaugh vote?
Well, Maine has even before this, Maine has had one of the highest voter participation levels in the nation, which is really fabulous. I think the young people are more fired up than they have been in the past because the stakes all seem a lot higher than they have in the past. And as for the women's vote thing, yeah, I think the Kavanaugh was kind of the last straw for most of Collins's sort of Democratic voters, voters like myself who might have voted for her in 2014, because she was a moderate Republican and we wanted more of those. But the fact that she voted to let Kavanaugh on the court basically meant she had to ignore the entire conservative project of the past 40 years to stack the court with conservative judges to overturn Roe v. Wade. And that's before we even get into the whole Christine Blasey Ford and Kavanaugh's things with the drinking. So yeah, I think women, women have been by and large the ones who have been volunteering, who have been making phone calls, who have been writing postcards and organizing marches and rallies. So I think it'll be the women's vote that decides this election. Yay, 19th Amendment.
Question from Jane Gallagher. 3 out of 4 of the candidates support a constitutional amendment to allow reasonable limits on money in politics, and the 4th supports full disclosure of donors' identities. Do you believe disclosure alone is sufficient to solve the problem that many Mainers see with the unlimited amounts of money flooding into our elections, or do we actually need a constitutional amendment as 72% of Mainers believe?
I think we need a national clean elections program. Here in Maine, we've got clean elections candidates who run for both parties and for none. And despite all the sort of hand wringing over public funding for public elections, it's going fine here in Maine. We should take that program national.
Yeah, I think there's just too much money in politics. So I would agree that I think a constitutional amendment is the way to go. I think transparency and disclosure is important, but I think the bigger issue is just the sheer volume of money pouring into these elections, and the fact that most of that money is coming from corporations who are now, in the eyes of the highest court in the land, the equivalent of people. And so something's got to give. And I think just knowing who is giving the money just isn't enough. I think we really need to control how much money is pouring into this industry, and that's really what it is right now. It's an industry.
I'm wary of any limits on freedom of speech whatsoever. Just the same way that I'm wary of attempts to repeal or modify the Section 230 that affects social media companies and how they regulate speech on their websites. I think they should be able to do what they want for the most part. But if we were going to take an approach and do that, I don't think we should follow that model. I think instead we should take a look at what Britain does, and they just limit overall spending on each campaign and overall political spending total. That's a much more viable approach than trying to limit donations.
Could that go get through the Roberts Court?
Well,
You know, putting caps on races. I mean, it seems like this has been a very permissive Supreme Court in terms of campaign. You know, really opening the floodgates.
It would have to be a constitutional amendment, but so would overturning Citizens United. And
right.
You know, no constitutional amendment is very likely to pass anyway. So
it's hard. It's amazing that they've ever amended the Constitution. Really, when you look at the country now, like, can you imagine anything that could get 2/3 support in both houses of Congress and then 3/4 of the states?
Yeah, at this point, given the current environment, it's largely an academic discussion.
Yeah. I wonder, just watching this race, and I don't have regular TV, so I watch a lot of streaming shows, and I'm aware that there's a lot of TV ads, but I'm not seeing them. Back when we worked in an office, they had TVs on all day long, and I had the ads like blaring at my head. So I'm not seeing so many ads, but I'm wondering, like, at some point, do they just cancel each other out? I mean, does anybody like pay any attention? Did you get any valuable information from them? Does it help anybody make up their mind? It just seems like mutually assured destruction. They just.
Well, the easy answer is, yeah, everybody tunes them out, but the data would actually demonstrates otherwise, and that is unfortunate. Really? This negative campaigning really works. What strikes me is how bifurcated it's become, where we can have a debate like we did tonight, and there are some barbs and there are some
right,
but it's largely civil. Other than Max,
except for Max Lynn.
Yeah. That's his strategy.
He had his moments, but everybody keeps it clean, keeps it nice, and then you turn on the TV and Gideon is going at, or Collins is going after Gideon's husband, and the Democrats are going after Collins' husband, and I mean, it could not get more personal. That's why earlier, Jim, I joked that was the first mention of Gideon's husband. You turn on the TV, that's all you hear about, and now all we're hearing about is how much money Collins' husband made under the tax bill. So it's like TV is where the gutter fighting goes on in the advertisements, and you go into the debates thinking that these candidates represent those advertisements, and I think people come away a little dismayed that where's all the nastiness that we see on TV?
Yeah, but that's that's not uncommon in politics generally, but especially in Maine too. I mean, candidates tend to stay above the board, and they let their their surrogates or their commercials go negative.
Right.
Doesn't Britain have sort of limited election seasons? Like, you can only, you can't show campaign ads, more than a certain amount of weeks before the election. I think that'd be easier to do something about than the whole money in politics thing, just a time limit of election.
They do. They have that as well, but that would also require a constitutional amendment here because you can't really tell people to not talk about politics.
Yeah, but what about the road signs? We do it with road signs. Maybe they could do it with TV.
That's on government property, though, Greg.
Yeah, that's true. And because they've been these ads have been going on for a year now. The Gideon Collins ads have been at each other for a year. We're probably about to wind up, but do we have time for another question, Strawberry? Or
yes, we do.
Okay.
So let's see. Mainers have a tradition of splitting the ticket. What do you think do you think enough people will balance their vote against Trump with a vote for Collins?
I think far fewer people will do it than have in the past. You know, I know people who used to vote, you know, were basically Democrats. Maybe they were registered unenrolled, but they liked voting for Republicans. You know, it made them, you know, feel good, made them feel like open-minded and not somebody who was lockstep with a party. And certainly, there's plenty of things wrong with both parties. I just don't think there's as many of those people as there used to be. We're, you know, you keep reading we're polarized. Well, I think we are actually polarized. Anybody else?
I think where that'll happen a lot is with Republicans who are moderate Republicans who don't like Trump. Most of them probably will not simply abandon Susan Collins because they don't think she's talking about Trump enough. For example, I don't expect that Roger Cates or Kevin Ray will vote for Hillary Gideon.
I think that's a good point, Jim, because in the past it's been, you know, the ticket splitting has been Democrats, as you said, Greg, who vote for Collins and they walk away feeling a bipartisan glow as they leave the voting booth. I think any ticket splitting that goes on, or any more ticket splitting that goes on, will have to do with Republican crossover than it does with Democrat crossover.
Yeah,
and that's going to reflect on dissatisfaction with Trump.
Okay, last word, Victoria.
I mean, I was one of those bipartisan voters in 2014, and I'm sure as heck not going to be voting for her this time. I think there will be more people who split the ticket, Biden at the top and then Collins, than there will be like Trump Gideon voters. But I don't think it will be as much of an issue as it has been in the past due to negative party polarization and just the sheer dominance of Trump in our politics.
All right. So we need to wind up. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the panel. You guys did a great job. Really interesting conversation. And I want to thank the subscribers. I'm really, happy that you chose to tune in. And please, if you want to continue the conversation, we have the forum called Letters to the Editor, 250 words or less. 150 words, if it's an endorsement letter, but we'd love to hear what you think, and I want to share it with the rest of the community. The email address is lettersToTheEditor@pressherald.com, and thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jim.